we've got what's known as an impairment compensation that is added to the skater skating score, and that always reflects the skater's impairment. And that's designed to bring them up to the average level of the average person in the street who's done a reasonable amount of skating training. The impairment compensation for each of the individual performances that is available will always have a predetermined what is the average score. And basically, it's the average number of the elements that would match the average programme component skaters for a skater skating at that technical level of ability. So, for example, if the average score for a particular performance was 10.00 and someone had 5% whole person impairment, they would get 5% of 10 added onto their skating score, and that would be known in advance. And the important thing about that is that it means that we're always taking the skater up to the average, but we're not giving them the benefit of a good skate or a bad skate. How they skate on the day will be reflected in their own skating scores. It won't be determined by the impairment compensation. We will always only take them up to the average person. So that then gives fairness to absolutely everyone taking part in the event. And the averages that are available for each of the different performances will vary according to the level that the skater is skating at and the number of elements. We use the Rondinelli guides to be able to evaluate their percentage, and the Rondinelli guides will correct for the skater's own internal challenges, but what they will not correct for is anything extra that we do over and above that, such as providing a guide or providing intellectual support or providing equipment that's going to support the skater. The whole person impairment is published through the world ranking system because we provide a record of what the whole person impairment is going to be provided for each of the individual skaters on that particular list, so everyone will know each other's whole person impairment percentage. The changes in the skaters classification results in a change in their whole person impairment percentage, and that can and does happen. So for example, a skater might have a condition such as Bardet-Biedl syndrome where the sight loss is progressive. So in the early stages, there might be 5% whole person impaired because they haven't identified all the issues. But then as the sight loss becomes apparent and worsens, then the percentage will increase because the functioning of the skater will change on the ice and how it impacts their skating. We do actually have the option of having an age-related impairment compensation added as well, because we recognise that there's certain parts of the ageing process that just results in an increase of additional needs, which is not reflected in the Rondinelli guides. And generally that applies from the age of 30. So what we do is we have the option for age to add on an age-related impairment compensation, and then that would apply in our master's results. So for every year that the person gets older from a particular age, then we'll add on 1% to their skating score. Because we've got skaters with additional needs, very often they can fall ill. They can have operations, and as a result, they can miss training or they can deteriorate because of the progressive condition. So in our system, if they've gone, for example, up to level 3, maybe, but then they've had an operation, and as a result of the operation, they've fallen back, they can drop to level 2 or even level 1 if necessary. They can, if, for example, they've then developed anxiety issues or they've lost their memory and they can't remember elements, if they then start to need a facilitator, they can get a facilitator for the future. What they had at one time when they were at their best is not necessarily where they need to be now. What we're always wanting to do is to look after the skater as they are right now and as they are presenting to us. So we will always continually dynamically adapt the system to meet their needs as they are right now. The only thing that we disclose in relation to the skater's disability and additional needs is the whole person impairment. We don't provide any details about, for example, whether or not they've got cystic fibrosis or a particular genetic condition. The skaters are obviously free to share that through other means, but what we focus very much on is trying to maintain as little public information about the skater's additional needs. The whole person impairment percentage will always have to be disclosed because it's part of the results. So as soon as you add something onto the skating scores, it is public, and the skater will always be making it public that they've got a certain percentage added onto their skating score by having it included in our event. So we're making something public because it's part of the competition result system. And then the only other criteria that is then added will be this like broad inclusive Paralympic classification, which is actually quite important for us to know because it gives us an indication of how we're actually going to manage those particular people at the event. So for example, we'll identify people that have got deafness because we will then be alerted to the fact that they're not going to hear the starting music, that they're going to need someone to help with the announcing, and that they're going to need particular types of results. So any information that is disclosed is done because it's absolutely necessary to the safe functioning of the event and to be able to share the essential information that is required with the event organisers and the volunteers at the event. The classification system will only identify the things that are permanent. So that will mean then that skaters who have got a non-permanent condition that, for example, maybe fluctuates, they can't do something one day, but they can do it a next. They don't get anything added on for something that is not permanent. Similarly, we're not really concerned with people that have got a minor or a temporary injury. So if someone's broken a leg, for example, then that doesn't make them an inclusive skater just because they've got an injury, because they're going to get better. But to accommodate skaters who have got fluctuating conditions, they're always going to have the option of taking part in our virtual events. Within the year of the virtual event where we've got the championships in December, they can submit any video that they have recorded in the whole of that year. So if they've got a good phase and they can skate well, then that's when they should record their performance to enter it for our submission. We've also got rules contained within the event structure that they can have a backup and they can then submit the virtual entry as well. And we found that that works very well with skaters with anxiety. So that if, for example, they don't know whether or not they can actually turn up and skate at the event, then we would allow them to submit a backup video entry. At the event, they would get their level result, but their championship would be determined at the virtual championships at the end of the year. So people that have got non-permanent conditions can still take part fairly within our structure. The classification system has the primary goal of ensuring the safety of the skater. So we have individualised risk assessment for each of the individual skaters where they tell us the disability. It's in their interests for them to tell us as much as they can about their disability, because if that is then verified, then they're going to get more added onto their skating score. So that really encourages disclosure of additional needs, which allows us to meet their needs as well. And bearing in mind that because we've got this individual risk assessment done and we meet their needs and we can set the systems up in advance before they ever take part in the event, it then results in it being a very safe environment. And the way that the events are run, importantly, also then ensures that we've got an accreditation policy that the skaters' parents and carers can be present at the event. So, for example, we've got one skater who comes up for her holiday every year to take part in our major event, and she requires 2 carers with her at all times, and that's absolutely fine. Those carers are allowed to be at rinkside and can maintain the care of the athlete at all times. If they needed the coach on the ice at the same time, the coach is allowed on the ice at the same time, because our primary goal throughout all of this will always be to ensure the safety of the skater, and that will be identified and managed through the classification process. The impairment compensation generally does the work of ensuring that you've got consistency across the disabilities. And the Rondinelli guides, they're now in their 6th edition, so that there has been a long time in development of equating the impact functionally of one type of disability as against the other. And we will only apply the Rondinelli guides if there's a functional impact of that disability on the particular skater. Some disabilities won't have any relevance to skating. So for example, in the Rondinelli guides, if you can't write, that's quite a significant disability because it'll affect typing and such like, whereas that's not relevant if you're skating as an individual. It will become relevant if you're taking part in pair skating because you're not going to be able to do grips. So what we will also do is we will assess the disability that the skater has, but we will also consider what activities it is that they're doing within skating, because some will impact and some will not impact. The inclusive skating system depends upon two key things. Number one, the impairment compensation, which makes the results fair no matter what your additional need is. And then secondly, the facilitation process, because people have approached us over the last decade and more with individual challenges that need to get met. And if the individual challenges don't have some sort of accommodation, then they're excluded. So what we do is through the facilitation process that takes place that we determine through classification, then we will make individual modifications to make sure that that person's included. Now, if it turns out that we've made an individual modification that results in inclusion, we then go back into the technical handbook and make adjustments so that that adjustment then becomes permanent and it becomes something that's available to everyone. In the able-bodied system, the national governing bodies of sport are required to make, under the equality legislation, reasonable adjustments to include a particular person. And if they're not able to make the reasonable adjustments, then the skater is excluded. Within the inclusive skating system, our aim is to do all adjustments necessary to achieve the inclusion. If we need to literally make an event for them to achieve the inclusion, we will do that. Inclusive skating system can definitely be applied to other sports. It will require, within the other sports, for someone to sit down and look at the technical rules that are available and the format within their system. The concept of the impairment compensation using the Rondinelli guides could apply generally, but then a lot will depend upon the type of sport that you've got. For example, most of our sport is a performance sport, so it's really easy to apply our system, particularly with the technical rules as they are adjusted and the different levels. If it was a race type event, we primarily use for safety at the moment time score, where they're just doing it at individual time. Now, you could do that by, for example, giving different starting times. One person might start, at this time, someone else that's got an impairment compensation where they get an extra 4.5 seconds might start 4.5 seconds difference. It's not a matter of them taking the whole system across and end of story. They can take the system, but they've then got to do some work to apply it to their particular format.